Hello everyone, I'm Nitsa and it's Friday, so that means it's time for another one of my MTG Top 10s. It's December, and if you live in the Northern Hemisphere, that means it's probably starting to get pretty cold outside. Because of that, I thought it'd be fun to look back at one of Magic's sets that takes place during a perpetual winter on the plane of Dominaria, and that is Coldsnap. Coldsnap is kind of an oddity in general because, while it came out in 2006, it was actually the third set in Ice Age block, which started with Ice Age in 1995 and Alliances in 1996, so it was the third set for a block that actually began 10 years before. On the whole, people think of Coldsnap as being sort of underpowered, and that's kind of true, but there are several cards that have made or are continuing to make their mark on the competitive Magic scene that first appeared in Coldsnap. In this video, we will look at the 10 cards that made the biggest impact. Before we get started, a quick reminder on how I score these. For every Pro Tour Top 8 a card has, it gets 2 points. This also applies to Vintage and Legacy Championship events, and 1 point for Grand Prix Top 8. So let's go ahead and move to number 10. At number 10, we have a card that does a good job of introducing you to one of the central mechanical elements of Coldsnap and Ice Age block more generally. That card is Scred, which does damage to a creature equal to the number of snow permanents you control. The snow subtype appears on lands, artifacts, and creatures within the block. If you have a deck loaded with snow-covered lands, Scred gets to be an incredibly efficient removal spell, capable of doing massive damage for a single mana at instant speed. It first showed up in the standard format in snow-heavy ramp decks that could power out lands quickly using Into the North. So Scred was an incredibly powerful removal spell in the deck. More recently, Scred has actually seen play in modern Scred red decks, mono-red control decks that run a ton of snow-covered lands and a few other cards that care about snow permanents, so Scred fits right in. Scred red so far only has one Grand Prix Top 8 in modern, but it is a deck that is always sort of on the fringes of modern, and Scred is what makes it worth playing. At number 9, we have one of the snow permanents I just mentioned, and that is Mouth of Ronam. Mouth of Ronam is a nice card because it is a land when you need it to be, even capable of producing snow mana, which is relevant for some cards, like Mouth of Ronam, actually, that's what that snow symbol means. But in the latter part of the game, it turns into a removal spell capable of killing a lot of creatures. It benefited from the fact that it could also be searched for by Into the North, which meant that Into the North went from being a card that could simply help you ramp to being a card that could actually search up a removal spell, more or less. In Standard, Mouth of Ronam saw play alongside Scred in some versions of Snow Mana Ramp, but it also found its way into other decks that just sought to run the land because of its utility, most prominently a reanimation deck that used Makeshift Mannequin. At number 8, we have another Snowland, though this is one that doesn't actually produce snow mana, or any mana for that matter, and that is Dark Depths, which makes a big, frightening Merit Lage creature token with flying and indestructible. Merit Lage was sort of Emrakul before Emrakul, a massive, tentacled, godlike being that was imprisoned on Dominaria in ice. This card is very cool flavor-wise because it represents the frozen Merit Lage, but if you can do enough work, you can set her free. This card didn't seem too great when it was first printed in Coldsnap, at least in terms of play. Again, was cool flavor-wise, because having to invest a total of 30 mana into Dark Depths to get your Merit Lage avatar on a land that didn't produce mana is not exactly what you wanted to be doing. As a result, Dark Depths did not see any play in the standard format. However, later cards would be printed that enabled silly combos that gave you Merit Lage at the very early points of the game, meaning you basically just win. The first of these combos was an extended, and it involved Vampire Hexmage, who could sacrifice itself to remove all the ice counters from Dark Depths and allow the avatar to emerge and end the game. The Hexmage was banned shortly after this combo was discovered, but only after Dark Depths managed to top 8 a Pro Tour and a Grand Prix. More recently, Dark Depths has been seeing play in Legacy Lands decks that get their name because they are composed primarily of lands and ways to tutor for and abuse lands, with most versions of the deck running 35-36 lands. This deck also tries to make Merit Lage as early as possible, but instead of using the Hexmage, it uses Thespian Stage to make a copy of Dark Depths. The stage then has no counters on it and immediately creates a Merit Lage avatar token. The Lands deck finished in the top 8 of the 2015 Legacy Championship and has put up several Grand Prix top 8s in the format as well, as recently as Grand Prix Las Vegas earlier this year, and it seems like a likely candidate to continue to add to its score. Also, an interesting thing to note about this card, it is the only rare to appear on this list. Everything else in this video is uncommon or common, which is not usually the case with this set. Shows you where the power level of the set was really located. At number 7, we have another snow permanent, the highest one on this list, Boreal Druid. Wizards used to always like to include Llanowar Elves or variants of it in standard formats. In other words, 1-mana green creatures, usually elves, who could produce mana, allowing you to play 3-mana creatures on turn 2. Boreal Druid doesn't produce green mana like most of them do. It produces only colorless mana, but because Boreal Druid is a snow creature, the mana it produces counts as snow mana, so you can use it for things like activating Mouth of Ronam's activated ability. Like all mana dorks, Boreal Druid has seen a decent amount of play. It benefited from being legal in the same standard as Lorwyn, which was a tribal set that had elves as one of its supported tribes, and all points it put up in that standard format were in elf decks. The most impressive showings were at Worlds in 2007 and Pro Tour Hollywood in 2008. At both events, it put up 2 top 8s. After rotating out of Standard, it managed to put up 1 Grand Prix top 8 at Grand Prix Oakland in 2010, an extended Grand Prix, where it appeared in another elf deck. It hasn't seen play since 2010, though, so it may eventually fall behind cards like Skred and Dark Depths, which are still seeing play. At number 6, we have a card that, despite being printed way back in Coldsnap, only really started to see a ton of play in the last couple of years, and that is Mishras Bauble. This thing seems pretty innocuous. It's a 0-mana artifact with what seems like a negligible effect. You get to look at the top card of a library, either yours or your opponent, so you get a little bit of information, and it allows you to draw a card on the next upkeep. If I had made this list just 2 years ago, it would not have even been on this list, but now it's climbed all the way up to number 6. The power of the card was finally realized in the modern format in Death's Shadow Zoo decks. In combination with Street Wraith and Gataxian Probe, when it was legal anyway, Mishra's Bauble made your deck much more consistent. This is because it provides free card draw, like the Wraith and the Probe do, and altogether they make it so your deck is essentially only 48 cards, making it easier for you to hit your Death's Shadow and your combo pieces like Temur Battle Rage. The information you gain from it isn't irrelevant either. If your opponent is in top deck mode or you know what is in your opponent's hand thanks to Thoughtseize, you can use the Bauble to see what your opponent is going to draw next, and that information can help you determine whether or not to go for the kill with your Death's Shadow. There have been 2 variants of Death's Shadow, and it has seen play in both. The first was Death's Shadow Zoo. More recently, the Grixis variant of the deck has become more popular. Grixis Death's Shadow is in contention right now for the best deck in Modern, and Mishra's Bauble is going to continue to climb up this list as long as that is the case. At number 5, we have a counterspell, Rune Snag. One of the recurring elements in Ice Age block are cards that look for other copies of themselves in the graveyard and become more powerful the more you have there. Rune Snag is worse than Mana Leak the first time you cast it, but every time thereafter it's better, making it scale better deeper into the game than Mana Leak does. It saw a lot of play in Standard, being run as one of the counterspells in many blue decks. First bursting onto the scene at Grand Prix Krakow in 2007, where it put up 5 top 8s in 2 different decks, Fairies and Mono Blue Control. Fairies would go on to be a defining archetype of that standard, and that is where it put up most of its points, though it also saw play in Revel Arc decks near the end of its time in Standard. It also managed a Grand Prix top 8 in the extended version of Fairies in 2009, but it hasn't seen any play since then, and in Modern, both Mana Leak and Remand see play before this does, so I think by this time next year, Mishra's Bauble will probably have passed it on this list. At number 4, we have a card that is part of the same cycle as Rune Snag, and that is Rite of Flame. This spell is part of a long line of red spells that allow you a temporary mana boost, and this one becomes more powerful the more Rite of Flames you have in your graveyard, which can sometimes allow for some absurd and lopsided starts if you have 2 or 3 of them in your opening hand. Rite of Flame is right at home in any deck that looks to abuse one of Magic's most powerful mechanics ever, Storm. So powerful that it is the namesake for a scale that Mark Rosewater uses to refer to how powerful mechanics are and whether or not we will ever see them again, with Storm being a mechanic we will absolutely never see again. Storm gives you extra copies of a card you cast for every other spell you cast on a given turn. Rite of Flame and other temporary mana boost spells are excellent for decks like that because they add to your Storm count while also allowing you to ramp up the mana to cast a spell with Storm. The first deck to abuse Rite of Flame was in Standard, where it was used alongside Dragonstorm to search up multiple hasty dragons in a turn and just in the game. It also saw play in extended Storm decks, winning there primarily with Tendrils of Agony. In Legacy it has seen play in Storm decks, but also in Goblin Charbelcher, a deck that runs very few lands and needs the effect of Rite of Flame to play the Charbelcher. When Modern was created as a format in August of 2011, Rite of Flame was, very briefly, legal, but that would only last a month, as Max Sjoblorn debuted a completely broken Storm deck that cruised to a top 8 at Pro Tour Philadelphia in 2011 that made use of the recently printed Pyromancer Ascension to go off far too quickly, and after that event, Rite of Flames was banned in September of 2011, and it's remained on that ban list ever since. At number 3, we have something Magic used to see a lot of, a color-hating spell, in this case, Deathmark. We had these a little bit more recently too in Tarkir block, but they used to be something that was basically always around, and Deathmark is one of the better color-hating cards ever printed, as it provides insane efficiency, being able to kill a green or white creature for a single black mana. Sure, that means it is limited to sideboard play for the most part, but it is a card that is a huge upgrade out of your sideboard, as it is going to be better than basically any removal spell in your deck against the right decks. When it was in Standard, basically any deck was playing at least a single Deathmark somewhere in the 75. This included makeshift mannequin decks, fairy decks, and Jund. It found its way into extended fairies and was also played in some extended storm decks, too, alongside Rite of Flame. Somewhat surprisingly, I think it has only seen fringe play in Modern so far, though I think if a predominantly green and white deck ever pushes to the top of Tier 1, you can bet people will be packing these in their sideboards there, too. At number 2, we have what is probably the most notorious card in the set, Counterbalance. Counterbalance actually has a very cool design, allowing you to counter spells for free if the top card of your library has the same converted mana cost as the card your opponent casts. That seems like kind of a silly card that wouldn't really do much most of the time, except for that Wizards also printed a little card called Sensei's Divining Top. The two of these combine to make for a pretty disgusting combo that basically results in a prison deck, since you aren't going to be resolving much against them. The Top and Counterbalance were not in the same standard, but they were both legal and extended, making up a countertop control deck named, obviously enough, for the two cards. Every other blue control deck in the format also ran Counterbalance, along with Sensei's Divining Top, and eventually the combo was considered a little too powerful, and Sensei's Divining Top was banned out of Extended in 2008. When Modern was created a few years later, Top was on the initial ban list, and it has remained there ever since. However, the Top was legal in Legacy for a long time, and that is where it has done the most damage. For a long time, one of the best decks in Legacy was a Miracles deck. Cards with Miracle all let you cast them more cheaply when you draw them, and the Top can not only make it so that Counterbalance keeps your opponent from doing anything, it can also make sure you draw your Miracle cards at the right time and cast them for the discounted cost. After several years of dominating the format, the Top also got banned in Legacy in April of 2017. Without the Top, Counterbalance is a bad card, so I don't imagine we'll be seeing it anymore, and we haven't since very early this year before the ban. At number 1, we have another color-hating card like Deathmark. This one is Flashfreeze. This one provides you with an incredibly efficient counterspell against the right color deck, and as a result, it has served as a key sideboard card in multiple formats for a pretty long time. It was the most prolific in Standard, showing up as a sideboard card in Delver and Delverless control decks. One of the other best decks of the time tried to win by casting Primeval Titan, and Flashfreeze obviously gave you a way to protect against that and gain a bunch of tempo. It wasn't limited to Standard, though, and found its way into a lot of sideboards and Extended too, primarily in Fairies decks. It also made the jump to Modern, where it has actually begun to see more play with the dominance of Collected Company decks. Some versions of the deck even sideboard Flashfreeze for use in the mirror. There isn't much on this list that really presents a threat to Flashfreeze's position at number 1, though if anything can do it, maybe it'll be Mishras Bauble in several more years. Well, that does it for this week's MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.